just don't understand Christmas, I guess. I like getting presents and sending Christmas cards and decorating trees and all that, but I'm still not happy. I always end up feeling depressed. Nobody sent me a Christmas card today. I almost wish there weren't a holiday season. I know nobody likes me. Why do we have to have a holiday season to emphasize it?
All right now. What seems to be your trouble?
I feel depressed. I know I should be happy, but I'm not.
Well, as they say on TV, the mere fact...
Ah, Charlie Brown. Everyone's favorite bald yellow shirt kid. No, not you. Here he is, Charlie Brown. He's our favorite depressed little punching bag of the Peanuts gang. Having almost 18,000 comic strips and having spawned 45 TV specials with new shows and movies still being produced, Peanuts has had its grip on the world since the 1950s. At its height, Peanuts was bringing in billions a year, and its creator, Charles Schulz, was making around 40 million annually. And while the Peanuts craze of the 20th century is no more, in today's world, the TV specials, social media, and the enduring adorableness of Snoopy have helped keep the franchise alive and well. And not to mention just how relatably insecure Charlie Brown's character is, for old and new generations alike. But who really was the man behind Peanuts, and how did he create one of the most popular and influential comic strips of all time? That's what we'll be discussing on this episode of Culture Explained, where we learn about the creators behind the works we all love. So let's get cultured and learn about Peanuts creator Charles Schulz. The only child of Carl Schulz and Dina Haverson, Charles Monroe Schulz was born in Minneapolis, Minnesota on November 26, 1922. 2 days after being born, an uncle nicknamed him Sparky, after Sparkplug from comic Barney Google. It's not sure why he chose that, but Charles Schulz would use that nickname for the rest of his life. Charles and his family moved around a lot in his youth, even moving to Needles, California for a short time. But they mostly settled in St. Paul, Minnesota, where his dad ran a barbershop. On his first day of kindergarten, Charles was drawing a man shoveling snow, and his teacher told him, "Someday, Charles, you're going to be an artist." And this was the first instance of recognition, which lit a spark in the young Sparky. Soon after, he'd attend Richard Gordon's elementary school in St. Paul, where he would skip 3rd and 5th grade. However, moving ahead so quickly was bad for the young Charles, as it made him quite timid and he couldn't maintain good grades. He said he would fail everything and was chronically lonely. He would also claim that the bigger kids would pick on him. However, his friends can't recall him ever being bullied. We'll touch on that later. Throughout his childhood, Charles and his father would bond over the Sunday morning funnies from all 4 published newspapers in Minneapolis. He was a big fan of comics like Skippy, Mickey Mouse, and Popeye, which was his favorite. This obsession with comic strips would continue into his high school years, as he would go to the drugstore every Saturday night to pick up the Sunday morning paper. Charles knew in his heart that he wanted to be a cartoonist. It's the only career path he even considered. Even his childhood friends would say that he would constantly be sitting and drawing. Occasionally, he would draw Spike, their second family dog, who liked eating unusual things. So on New Year's Eve of 1936, he drew a picture of Spike doing just that. With help from his father, he would send it in a letter to Robert Ripley's Believe It or Not. His drawing would appear in the syndicated panel and was captioned saying, "A hunting dog that eats pins, tacks, and razor blades, drawn by Sparky." Truly a proud moment for the young 14-year-old artist. Straight after this, his art teacher at Central High School gave him an assignment to draw any object in sets of 3. Astonished at Sparky's artistic abilities, she encouraged him to submit artwork for the school's yearbook. But the students in charge were not keen on rewarding a boy who might have felt a sense of superiority thanks to his teacher. After this rejection of his drawings, Schulz would turn this into his first intellectual grudge, thinking of himself as a thwarted, innocent, misunderstood kid with a good heart who just wanted some recognition for his work. This sense that he never got what he deserved provided inspiration for Charlie Brown's character, who is basically Charles Schulz himself. The school would later rectify this, as now they have a plaque of Schulz with his name misspelled, and they have a 5-foot statue of Snoopy in the main office. During his senior year, his mother showed him an advertisement for art school. These were classes he could take from home, and since he was so introverted and afraid of being judged by his teachers and classmates, this was perfect for him. He signed up for the course in cartooning and illustration at the Federal School of Applied Cartooning, now called Art Instruction. The course was a costly $170, which was a lot during this Great Depression era. He'd go on to graduate high school on June 14th, 1940, and by this final year, he was finally earning some respectable grades again. After high school, he worked a few odd jobs, like being a golf caddy. He was also keeping up with his art instruction work, as well as sending his work for publication to magazines. He even applied to Disney, but the magazines turned him down, and Disney said he was unqualified to be an animator. At the age of 20, Charles Schulz would suffer two monumental events. The attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941 caused him to be drafted the following year. And at the beginning of his service, his mother, who had been sick for some time, passed away from cervical cancer in March of 1943 at the age of 50. Charles was extremely close to his mother, and this hurt him dearly. Interestingly, one of the last things his mother said to him was that if they ever got another dog, they should name it Snoopy, which is a Norwegian term of endearment, something a mother may call her child. Originally, the Snoopy we all know and love was going to be called Sniffy, but due to a conflict with another comic, Schulz was forced to think of another name and remembered what his mother had said. It's always interesting to me how things just work out the way that they do, because I can't imagine a world where Snoopy is called Sniffy. By the end of his service, Charles was a staff sergeant and a squad leader of a 50 caliber machine gun team. Even during wartime, he kept up with his sketching, drawing everyday army life in his sketchbook. His unit only saw combat at the end of the war, and he remembers his one opportunity to fire his machine gun at the enemy, but he forgot to load it. Thankfully, the German soldier willingly surrendered. For being under fire, Schulz proudly received a combat infantry badge. He was very proud of his time in the military, to the point where he claims that it's his proudest accomplishment in life. But this period of time would haunt him, with the loss of his mother and the horrors of war. After returning home from the war, he moved back in with his father, who was worried for him. His father would ask their pastor, who also organized the mother's funeral, to invite Sparky to church. It was at this time when Charles became a very religious man. He'd go to church 3 times a week, have long discussions with priests and ministers, teach Sunday school, and apparently read the Bible 3 times over. He'd soon get a job as a letterer for a Catholic publishing company called Timeless Topics. He'd also work as an instructor at the same art school he was a student of before the war. He'd work at art instruction for 5 years, assessing the work of students. It was here where he met fellow instructors Charlie Brown, Linus Maurer, and Frida Rich. Now, those keen observers of you will realize that these are names of Peanuts characters. Charles Schulz named the majority of his Peanuts characters after people he knew in real life, and even based some of their personalities off of them. Now, I won't be going over every character, but they're basically people he knew from school, from work, from the war, his friends and family, and things like that. He also met a red-headed accountant girl named Donna Mae Johnson, whom he had a romantic relationship with. The two dated, but Donna had secretly been seeing another boy at the same time named Al Wold. Charles would propose to Donna only to be rejected, and she married her other lover instead. Charles claimed that Donna's mother didn't like him, and that was the reason why. Although the truth isn't very clear either. It's said that Donna wanted a life as a housewife, something that marriage to a cartoonist didn't necessarily promise. But it's also said that Donna's mother actually liked Al more, since she knew him better. And Donna has also said that she just clicked better with Al. But whatever the real reason was, Schulz would never let this go and made Donna into a Peanuts character as the little red hair girl that Charlie Brown is in love with. While never shown in the strip, she was featured in some of the specials and even the newest movie, and would be named Heather Wold, Wold being Donna's surname after marriage. While at his second gig at Timeless Topics, being a letterer for other artists in the studio, his boss let him do a comic strip of his own as a reward for doing such a good job. He did a 4-page story about soldiers, which hasn't been uncovered yet, and then a full page of humor cartoons which were called Just Keep Laughing. Those were first published in February of 1947, but after they printed 2 of them, the priest who was running the business didn't care for them, so Schulz only got to do 2 of them before they were pulled in April that same year. Although this might have been disappointing, just a few months later, he was able to sell his own comic he had been working on for some time called Sparky's Lil Folks. This was picked up by Minneapolis Tribune on June 8th, but after a disagreement with pay and the lack of a regular weekly spot, after just 2 publications of Sparky's Lil Folks, Schulz took his cartoon to Pioneer Press, and on June 22nd, Lil Folks began its 2.5-year run. A lot of important things happened during this short period. For one, after asking his fellow instructor Charles F. Brown to use his name in Lil Folks, the very first use of the name Charlie Brown occurred on this panel on May 30th, 1948, with a dog that resembles an early Snoopy. However, the name Charlie Brown was used interchangeably, being used on several different characters. Other Peanuts characters would also make their vague debuts in Little Folks, like a bunch of dogs that resembled an early Snoopy, Schroeder, Sally, a girl named Patricia, and more, as well as the use of popular phrases like good grief. I'll leave the link to all the strips in the description. They offer some good insight into Charles Schulz's early development as an artist. And just to mention it briefly, Schulz also did 17 comics for the Saturday Evening Post from May 1948 to July 1950. Schulz's run of Little Folks in the Pioneer Press came to an end when he demanded a pay increase and to be taken out of the women's section of the paper, or just for some other form of recognition like a daily comic strip. The paper refused and Schulz threatened to quit. They did not oppose, so Schulz's Little Folks ended its run in January of 1950. After developing Little Folks further and after a few rejections, he successfully pitched it again to United Feature Syndicate, one of the largest comic distribution companies in the United States. They offered Schulz half the profits and asked for strips instead of full-page panels. They also needed to change the name of the strip as it conflicted with two existing comics, Lil Abner and Little Folks. The name the syndicate came up with was Peanuts, after the peanut gallery in Howdy Doody, which was a nickname back in the day for the rowdy and cheap seats of a theater who would often throw peanuts at performers. This renaming to Peanuts was a decision Schulz never understood and deeply resented. He would go on to say, "I'm still convinced it's the worst title for any comic strip." Schulz preferred naming it something like Charlie Brown and Friends, but United lied, telling him that a common name like Charlie Brown couldn't be copyrighted, and it was later revealed that a sales manager at the company chose the name without even having read the comic first. Eventually, the two parties came to an agreement to have it called Peanuts, but have good old Charlie Brown on Sundays. Nevertheless, the Peanuts made its debut on October 2nd, 1950 in 7 newspapers, including the Washington Post and the Chicago Tribune. Unlike Little Folks, Peanuts used a fixed set of characters. In this very first publication, we can see good old Charlie Brown. We also see characters Shermie and Patty, not to be confused with Peppermint Patty, that's a different character. Even though Schulz had been a professional for some years now, things were obviously still developing. For one, Patty and Shermie were eventually phased out, even though they were the earliest and only Peanuts characters for 4 months alongside Charlie Brown and Snoopy. We also see a young Charlie Brown, whose character was much more lighthearted and playful, also not even wearing his iconic striped shirt yet. He wouldn't get that until December later that year. Snoopy is first seen as a normal dog who barks and plays fetch and doesn't even stand until 1956, and doesn't sleep on top of his house until 1958, and who isn't even Charlie Brown's dog yet. His iconic doghouse was first shown from the front, but later only the side, to hide the magic of Snoopy's fantasy world. And in 1965, he'd have his first iconic battle with the Red Baron. Snoopy's character took the longest to develop, according to Schulz. Now, before we keep learning about more Peanuts characters, I'd like to discuss the darker side of Schulz, as I think it's integral to his work. So, after being rejected by Donna Mae Johnson, he met recently divorced Joyce Haverson, whom he would marry soon thereafter in 1951. His father would also remarry at this time. That's not important, but I thought I'd mention it. While on their honeymoon in Colorado, Charles ominously admitted, "I don't think I can ever be happy." Joyce would later recount that it's almost as though he liked being depressed. She urged him to seek out help, but said, he said he wouldn't go to a psychiatrist because it would take away his talent. Misery became a strategy because happiness, as Schulz said, is not funny at all. After some time, Charles would adopt Meredith, Joyce's daughter from her previous marriage. Joyce had no intention of staying in Minneapolis, so the two moved to Colorado and eventually California and had 4 more children. As Peanuts gained popularity, the marriage began to sour, as Joyce was reportedly a forceful individual and was frustrated with Charles' inability to be happy even though he was a celebrity and a wealthy man. It's widely accepted that Joyce was the inspiration for Lucy Van Pelt's characteristics, as her frustration and demands for psychiatric help for Charles would later be traits of Lucy's, although the initial idea for Lucy came from Meredith, Joyce's daughter. I'd like to clarify though, it's not like she was mean or anything, it's just that she was a bit headstrong. And with Charles being such an awkward and timid man, they didn't mix very well together. She was reportedly a great mother, but had to handle almost all of the parenting as Schulz was busy with his work. And Charles would even be a distant father and husband, with his friends recounting that they never even saw him kiss Joyce. Now, I'm not claiming to know Charles, but from my research, I learned just how flawed of a person he could be. He was reportedly very competitive to a toxic degree, and quite suave with the ladies, as we'll find out later. Also, it seemed like he liked victimizing himself when there wasn't really any reason to, like when he blamed Donna's mother for having rejected him, or this reported fabrication of being bullied in school when his friends say no such thing happened. Maybe he thought that if he let himself be happy, then he would lose his sense of humor. He definitely poured so much of himself into the strip and its characters, and I don't think Peanuts would be as appealing if Charlie Brown was just a normal happy boy, as his insecurities are the best and most relatable thing about his character. Schulz said that Charlie Brown has to be the one who suffers because he is a caricature of the average person. Most of us are much more acquainted with losing than we are with winning. The next Peanuts character to join the gang would be Violet in February 1951. She'd start off being an early love interest between Charlie Brown and Shermie, and notably was kind of an early Lucy, being a bully to Charlie Brown, and she was even the first to pull the football away from him and the first to call him a blockhead. But just like Shermie and Patty, Violet's role was also diminished. Schroeder would make his first appearance in May that year, first appearing as a baby, but quickly grew to a child. Schulz got the idea to incorporate his daughter Meredith's toy piano in the strip and decided to give it to Schroeder. Lucy appeared in March of 1952 and also appears as a toddler with these weird, creepy, doll-like eyes, which were thankfully quickly changed due to a suggestion from an editor. Within just a few months of her debut, she started developing her much more usual crabby-looking self. Like his sister, Linus debuted in 1952, first mentioned by Lucy in July, and later shown in September as a toddler. He didn't get his blanket, however, for 2 years, in June of 1954, and for a brief moment in 1962, Schulz experimented with Linus wearing glasses to show off his intellectual side, but the decision was reversed, as the glasses interfered with the expression lines. Linus is actually Schulz's favorite character, since he finds him so easy and fun to work with, and is also the most versatile and innocent. And that's our main cast. The rest would come at later dates, but the core cast of Peanuts was established just 4 years after the start of the comic strip, in terms of their defining features and all of that. After a somewhat slow start, Peanuts really started to catch on. At the start of 1952, the strip started to be published on Sundays and in color, and more publishers were asking to print Schulz's work. Soon he was hiring his old friends from art instruction to keep up with production on new projects, as now he was doing the daily strip, book signings, interviews, and all those things that come with more fame. In 1955, Kodak became the first product sponsor for Peanuts with its Brownie cameras, and later that year, Charles received the Reuben Award for Outstanding Cartoonist of the Year. He was presented the award by Reuben himself, that being Reuben Goldberg, famous for Rube Goldberg machines. He'd win that award again almost a decade later. A lot more success happened for Schulz throughout the 50s as audiences really latched onto Peanuts. He had a few other short-lived projects, like these religious gag strips for the Church of God. Also the sports comic he worked on with his friend Jim. He also illustrated 2 volumes of Kids Say the Darnest Things. This decade also saw the introduction of the first set of toys from the Hungerford Plastics Corporation. By 1958, the strip was in 400 papers, having only started off in 7. Now, I'd like to skip to 1959, where the next monumental milestone occurred. So, the granddaughter of a Ford advertising executive pitched the idea of getting licensing for Peanuts for some advertising. Schulz agreed only because he drove a Ford himself. This would turn into a 3-year advertising deal between Peanuts and the Ford's new Falcon car. These would start off as printed ads drawn by Schulz himself, but the advertising company that Ford had been working with, J. Walter Thompson, got another idea for animated commercials. Charles obviously wasn't an animator, so someone else had to be brought on board. But Schulz was not keen on working with anyone from Hollywood or New York, so they had to contact an animator that met these requirements. They brought on Jose Guatemoc Melendez, director at Playhouse Pictures and former animator at Disney, Warner Brothers, and United Productions of America, where he worked on hundreds of other commercials. He also went by Bill Melendez, which was a name given to him by Disney when his name was too long for the credits. He was introduced to Charles as a Mexican, which was quite an oddity at that time in the industry. Schulz saw Bill's work and there was nothing he hated, and the two got along very well. After working closely with each other to get the style right, from that point on, Bill would be the only person Schulz would trust to animate his Peanuts characters. He would animate about half a dozen of these Falcon commercials, and although this was his first time animating Peanuts, it was astonishing how much foundation was set in these commercials for later Peanuts specials, like using child voice actors, which was unconventional for the time. By the way, this is insane. In this first commercial, Charlie Brown is handing out chocolate cigars. What a different time. Some years later in 1963, a documentary covering one of the greatest baseball players of all time called A Man Named Willie Mays was produced by Lee Mendelson. About a week after it premiered, Mendelson was flipping through a magazine and came across a Peanuts strip about baseball. He thought to himself, "You've just done the world's greatest baseball player, now you should do the world's worst baseball player, Charlie Brown." He'd call up Schulz to pitch the idea to him. Although his idea was initially turned down, Mendelson would mention his work with Willie Mays. Schulz happened to be a big fan of baseball, playing it in his youth, and had even watched Mendelson's documentary with his son. He said, "Well, if Willie Mays can trust you with his life, maybe I can trust you with mine." Schulz insisted bringing Bill Melendez on board to animate parts of the documentary. And one day while driving, Lee Mendelson was listening to the radio and heard the tune "Cast Your Fate to the Wind" by Vince Guaraldi. He thought the music was a perfect match for Peanuts and got in contact with Guaraldi, who agreed to produce the music for the documentary. After some weeks, an excited Guaraldi called up Mendelson asking to play him a piece of music he had just written, but Mendelson really didn't want to hear it through the low quality phone audio. But Guaraldi insisted, saying, "I've got to play this for someone right now or I'll explode." He played Mendelson what would become the famous Charlie Brown song, Linus and Lucy. It just blew me away. It was so right and so perfect. For Charlie Brown and the other characters, I have no idea why, but I knew that song would affect my entire life, said Mendelson. They'd go on to finish the documentary, calling it A Boy Named Charlie Brown, not to be confused with the movie later released with the same name. However, Lee spent over a year trying to find an interested network or sponsor for the documentary, but to no avail, so it never aired on television, but it's now available online and for purchase. In April of 1965, Charlie Brown made his way onto the front cover of Time magazine. And right after this, Mendelson was contacted by advertising agency McCann Erickson, who was working for Coca-Cola. He thought they were calling about the documentary, when in fact, they pitched the idea of a Christmas special instead. Thinking he'd get to sell his documentary in the process, he lied and said that they had already been working on a Christmas special. Mendelson agreed to the idea on a Thursday, and McCann Erickson needed the pitch on Monday, so he quickly called up Schulz to give him the good and bad news. The good news being that they sold a Charlie Brown Christmas special, the bad news being that they only had a few days to get a script together. They met the next morning and pretty much created the story that would be in the final product, with the true meaning of Christmas, the play, and the tree. Coca-Cola agreed to buy the special and gave them only 6 months and $76,000 to produce it. They ended up going $20,000 over budget and finished the special only 10 days before it was set to air. Although there were serious concerns from CBS and even Bill and Lee about the special being too mature and slow, it aired on December 9th and did insane numbers. Almost half of Americans watching TV that night tuned in, and they stayed tuned in, they didn't switch the channel. The special went on to win a George Foster Peabody Award and then an Emmy for Outstanding Children's Program, making it the second animated TV program to win that award after Hanna-Barbera's The Huckleberry Hound Show. While accepting the award, Schulz said, "Charlie Brown is not used to winning, so we thank you." CBS thought that the special would surely fail with just how unconventional it was for the time, with its slow pace and religious aspects that Schulz added in, with Linus reading a passage from the Bible. But after it did so well, they immediately ordered up 4 more specials. And from this point on, a Charlie Brown Christmas became a yearly tradition on CBS until ABC acquired the rights in 2000. This special also marked the beginning of a long friendship between Lee Mendelson, Bill Melendez, Vince Guaraldi, and Charles Schulz, who would continue producing Charlie Brown specials for years to come. The importance of these men cannot be overstated. For instance, did you know that Bill Melendez was the voice of Snoopy? I didn't know that until researching for this video. I guess you could say Snoopy is Mexican. Well, at least his voice actor is. But anyway, since this video is about Charles Schulz, I'm gonna keep it about him, but I definitely want to cover these three men in another video in the future, as I'm sure most of you probably know Peanuts from the TV shows and not the comic strips, since the age of comic strips kinda died a long time ago. So if you're interested in learning more about the production of the TV shows, please consider subscribing. And now back to Charles Schulz's life. And unfortunately, we have to go straight back to being depressed, as a week after winning the Emmy, on May 29th, 1966, Carl Schulz, his father, passed away. And even earlier that year, his studio had burned down, which Schulz actually portrayed in a strip of Snoopy's house burning down. He even ran into the burning building to save 6 comic strips that were scheduled for next month. But that didn't slow down Peanuts at all, as the following year, Peanuts made its way onto stage with You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown, and it also made its way onto the cover of Life magazine. In 1968, after the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert F. Kennedy, a teacher spoke with Schulz about introducing a black character. So in July that year, Franklin, the first character of color, was introduced to the strip. Also that year, NASA used Snoopy as their mascot for their astronaut safety program. Snoopy would be the lunar module, snooping around the lunar surface in low orbit, and Charlie Brown's name would be used for the command module. One final big thing happened that year, as Peanuts made its debut at the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, and has been a staple of the parade ever since. Small correction, there was a Peanuts float advertising You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown the year before, but the first balloon was in 1968. The next year, in 1969, Charles and his wife Joyce opened up the Redwood Empire Ice Arena, which held skating events, hockey, Peanuts related stuff, and so much more. As you can see, I'm really rapid firing through these years, as so much happened in this Peanuts crazed era. It was popping up all around you, whether you wanted it to or not. As we said before, this strip started in 7 newspapers, and at this time, it had jumped to 745 daily papers and 393 Sunday papers. One thing happened in Schulz's life in the 70s, which I don't want to discuss, but since I'm covering his life, I'll at least touch on it. He met a girl named Tracy Claudius who was photographing him for a magazine article. Charles would go on to have an affair with the 25-year-old while he was in his late 40s. His wife Joyce would find out, and after agreeing to stop seeing Tracy, he didn't. Schulz would propose to Tracy while still married to Joyce, and would even make this mistress a faceless character in Peanuts, as the girl beagle Snoopy is in love with. Much more could be said on the matter, but I'd like to respect the opinions of the family, as they have been very outspoken on reports of this. But I'd like to cover one last thing that really upset me on the matter. So Schulz wrote numerous love letters to Tracy, and back in 2012, her family got the idea to auction off these letters. These letters contained drawings, and they auctioned off for $350,000. Amy Schulz, daughter of Charles, called the auction immature and tacky, and I would very much agree. Charles and Joyce would divorce in 1972, and he'd remarry in 73 to Elizabeth Jean Forsyth. He met her at the ice rink that Joyce and Charles built together. From here, things went on as usual, with countless awards, shows, exhibits, events, and so much more. I'll leave the link to the Schulz Museum page in the description, as it has a pretty good summary of everything that happened regarding Peanuts throughout the years. But a few more quick events just to wrap things up. In 1981, Charles underwent a heart bypass surgery and was contacted by then President Ronald Reagan, wishing him a speedy recovery. This next one is wacky, and I just wanted to include it. In 1988, 2 gunmen entered Schulz's home and tried to kidnap him, but they were thankfully scared off by one of his daughters who was pulling up the driveway of the house. In June of 1996, Charles Schulz received a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, right near Walt Disney. Snoopy would also get his own star in 2015. By the way, did you know that celebrities have to pay for their own star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame? And they even have to nominate themselves, or someone else can nominate them, I guess. But I was always under the impression that the stars were just given to celebrities. So I mentioned in the beginning of the video that there were almost 18,000 Peanut strips, and you might be wondering how that's possible. Well, this was a daily strip for a very long time, and Schulz never took a break. Until 1997, that is, when he took a 5-week vacation to celebrate his 75th birthday. And now we're finally at the end. After a long journey full of laughs, happiness, and loneliness, Schulz discovered he had colon cancer and his health was failing. He would write this retirement letter in December of 1999. It read, Unfortunately, I am no longer able to maintain the schedule demanded by a daily comic strip, therefore I am announcing my retirement. Charlie Brown, Snoopy, Linus, Lucy, how can I ever forget them? This letter would be the last daily comic strip, but there were still a few Sunday strips left. During these late years, Schulz also developed a tremor. He'd say, "Sometimes my hands shake so much I have to hold my wrist to draw." And you can definitely see this in some of his later drawings where his lines look very wiggly. By the end of its run, the Peanuts comic strip was syndicated in over 2,600 newspapers, as well as in 21 languages and 75 countries. After signing the final Peanuts strip, Schulz recalled saying, "All of a sudden I thought, you know, that poor kid, he never even got to kick the football. What a dirty trick, he never had a chance to kick the football." Succumbing to a heart attack in his sleep, Charles Monroe Schulz died in his Santa Rosa home in California at the age of 77 on February 12, 2000. Poetically, his final Peanut strip with his farewell letter was due to publish the very next day. Schulz passed away just hours before his final strip. The letter in this last Sunday strip is very similar to the last daily strip, but it has one included line saying, "My family does not wish Peanuts to be continued by anyone else." That's right, before his death, Charles Schulz requested that no one else be allowed to draw Peanuts. And although the syndicator owned the rights to Peanuts, they honored the request and no other Peanuts comic strips have been made, although reruns are still published and movies and specials have still been produced, as Schulz saw those as separate entities. And with that, we bid farewell to Charles Schulz. I think we can all say, thank you. Thank you for Charlie Brown, thank you for Snoopy, thank you for all the laughs, and thank you for Peanuts. And thank you all for watching, it really means a lot. Before ending the video, I just wanted to say that it was really challenging covering the life of Charles Schulz. He's such a complex guy and I don't think anyone can really explain who he truly was. I'll leave the link to Charles Schulz's documentary in the description. There's some great first-hand account information in there about who he was as a person. Also, there was a lot of stuff I couldn't get around to covering, so I think I'll start making some YouTube shorts to fill in those gaps for this video and future videos. On my channel, I like covering the stories of artists and creators who have helped shape our culture into what it is today. Just like with this video, you probably all know Peanuts, but probably not the guy behind it. So if you're interested in learning more things like that, please check out the rest of the channel and consider subscribing. And speaking of the channel, I have a new channel name. Long story, but it's gonna be Culture Explained from now on. Alright everyone, remember to stay cultured and I'll see you all next time.